Smokey Yunick wasn't just a mechanic. He was a legend built from equal parts brilliance and rebellion.
Smokey Yunick wasn't just a mechanic. He was a legend built from equal parts brilliance and rebellion. By the time he passed away in 2001, his name had become synonymous with outsmarting the system. But his most mysterious legacy wasn't written in rule books or recorded in race stats. It was hidden behind the locked doors of the best damn garage in town, his infamous workshop in Daytona Beach, Florida. For decades, racers, inspectors, engineers, and even fans speculated about what really went on behind those walls. Some said Smokey was building engines years ahead of their time. Others claimed he had blueprints NASCAR never allowed on the track, but no one knew for sure because Smokey didn't let just anyone in, not even close. The shop itself was a nondescript building, almost unimpressive from the outside. But what it represented was power, mystery, and unfiltered innovation. Smokey guarded it like a vault, not out of paranoia, but because it was his sanctuary. It was where he broke the rules by following them to the letter, where he challenged the limits of speed, and where he left behind the unfinished chapters of his career. Over time, it became more than a workshop. It became a fortress of resistance against corporate racing, bureaucracy, and anyone who couldn't keep up with his mind. When Smokey passed, his family and a few close friends were finally allowed to step inside and take inventory. They weren't just walking into a garage. They were entering a sealed legacy. What they discovered inside would both confirm the legend and deepen the mystery. Smokey had taken secrets to his grave, but not all of them stayed buried. Some were hiding in plain sight, waiting to tell the world who Smokey Yunick really was. As cancer slowly took its toll on Smokey Yunick in the late 1990s, those closest to him noticed something different about the man who had always defied convention. The cowboy-hated outlaw of the garage was becoming quieter, more introspective. He stopped taking visitors unless they were family or trusted friends. The sharp-witted interviews faded. The garage hours shortened. And when Smokey did speak, it was less about horsepower and more about legacy. He knew his time was running out. Still, there was no big farewell tour, no teary goodbye to NASCAR. Smokey had always been a private man in a very public world. The garage became more than just his workshop in those final months. It became a vault for thoughts he wasn't ready to share. Close confidants later recalled how he would sometimes sit alone, staring at old blueprints, flipping through journals, or just walking silently between half-covered chassis like he was saying goodbye in his own way. But there were hints that something deeper lay buried under the shop's dusty workbenches and behind sealed doors. He made cryptic comments. They weren't ready then, and they're still not, and joked more than once about unfinished business that'll outlive me. Those who knew him best suspected he had projects left behind, not just unfinished, but intentionally hidden. Smokey had no interest in letting people rewrite his story after he was gone. But he also knew curiosity had a way of surviving death. So, when Smokey passed away on May 9, 2001, the family didn't just inherit a building. They inherited a mystery. The garage he left behind was a time capsule sealed by a man who knew too much and trusted too little. And no one, not even NASCAR, knew exactly what was inside. It wasn't until weeks after the funeral that the garage was finally open to those brave enough to sort through Smokey Yunick's mechanical kingdom, gathered on a sweltering Florida afternoon to face what Smokey had left behind. What they found wasn't just a garage filled with tools. It was a mausoleum of innovation. Dust covered everything. Unfinished cars sat like sleeping giants, draped in tarps that hadn't been moved in years. Workbenches overflowed with parts that didn't match any known engine, and drawers were filled with technical sketches drawn by hand. But what hit hardest wasn't the quantity. It was the purpose every shelf told a story. One held dozens of carburetor prototypes, each labeled with cryptic notes in Smokey Yunick's handwriting. Another section of the shop was lined with boxes marked only with dates and engine codes, some referencing projects long forgotten by the racing world. One crate was simply labeled, "Don't touch until you know what you're doing." The deeper they searched, the more it became clear. Smokey hadn't just been building cars. He had been building a message. There was no clear organization, but there was intent. Blueprints taped to the wall were yellowed with age, but still razor-sharp in design. Pieces of what looked like experimental fuel systems were scattered across a metal table. At the far end of the garage, a locked cabinet contained what looked like confidential correspondence between Smokey and Key. Figures from NASCAR, letters filled with sharp words and veiled warnings. Smokey had filled this place with every ounce of rebellion and brilliance he had. And for the first time, the world would see what the outlaw genius had been hiding all along. Tucked into the corner of the shop, beneath a canvas tarp and surrounded by crates of older parts, the team found something that stopped them cold. A fuel system prototype, unlike anything anyone had ever seen. It was compact, oddly shaped, and accompanied by several handwritten notes from Smokey himself. The documents detailed a method of fuel compression and delivery that, if real, could have provided a massive performance edge without breaking a single NASCAR rule at the time. It was efficient. It was stealthy. And most of all, it was never used. One note scribbled next to the diagram read, "They won't allow it. Too fast. Too clean. Too smart." Another said simply, "If they won't let me race it, bury it." According to insiders who later spoke anonymously, this system had actually been tested privately in the late 80s. It worked almost too well. Smokey Yunick had allegedly approached NASCAR to get the design approved for competition. Their response, a hard number, officials deemed it unfair and potentially dangerous. Though no formal reason was ever given, rumors say a few top NASCAR techs were invited to the garage to see it firsthand and immediately insisted it be disassembled or destroyed. But Smokey didn't destroy it. He hid it, whether out of pride or principle. He kept the system intact, stored in pieces and buried behind years of dust. To him, it was proof, not of cheating, but of capability. It was the culmination of decades of thinking ahead, and it now sat there like a time bomb of innovation, waiting for the world to catch up. What they found that day wasn't just a fuel system. It was a reminder. Smokey Yunick had been 10 steps ahead, even when nobody was looking. Nestled behind a line of dusty rolling tool chests, the team uncovered what can only be described as an arsenal of unseen horsepower. Smokey Yunick had carefully tucked away multiple prototype engines, some fully assembled, others meticulously disassembled and labeled in bins like rare fossils. These weren't just variations of known builds. They were mechanical oddities that broke the mold of 20th century race engineering. One engine featured a cross-ram intake design coupled with a radical dual plenum chamber setup, something that had never seen a NASCAR track. Another was built using ultralight composite materials far ahead of their time with a handwritten note reading, "Carbon doesn't lie." One design included early electric assist technology, not unlike what modern hybrid race cars now use. The discovery left Smokey Yunick's friends in awe. Had he already cracked a version of regenerative braking, torque vectoring? No one knew for sure, but what was certain is that Smokey wasn't just thinking about winning races. He was thinking about changing them. Some engine blocks had stamped serial numbers that didn't match any manufacturer. Others bore the faint etching of Smokey Yunick's initials beside markings in code. There were even blueprints for powertrains that could integrate direct fuel injection at a time when that technology was still experimental in aviation. It was like stepping into a mechanical time machine where the future of motorsports had been quietly built in a Florida garage, while the rest of the racing world caught up. The tragedy, these engines never roared. They were never raced, never scrutinized under the heat of competition. Smokey Yunick had locked away not just inventions, but possibilities. And by doing so, he'd written a secret alternate history of motorsports, where the rules were broken not by rebellion, but by imagination. Amid the mechanical artifacts, they found something far more human. A worn, dented metal filing cabinet. Inside dozens of envelopes, some sealed, some open, all handwritten. These were personal letters, some addressed to his family, others to old friends. But what stopped everyone called were the ones addressed to NASCAR officials, past drivers, and even specific inspectors by name. They were never sent. One letter dated 1992 read, "You never wanted the best. You wanted control. You'll get it, but you'll lose what made the sport great." Another, "You made me out to be a villain, but I was your best innovator. All I did was think harder than your lawyers." Tucked into the back was a folded napkin with scrolled words in faded pen. "I gave them everything, and they still hated me for it." Those closest to Smokey always said he was sharp, proud, and unafraid. But these notes revealed something deeper: pain, betrayal, and a man struggling with how history might remember him. Some letters spoke of regret, like not finishing a car he'd promised to a dying veteran. Others hinted at fear, like the idea that racing had become too political, too sanitized, too willing to suppress genius in the name of uniformity. There were lighter notes, too. Jokes written to Richard Petty, a half-finished draft of a book forward he never published, but the tone was consistent. Smokey felt like a man who had built greatness and then been exiled from it. These papers weren't just writings. They were raw emotion. The last unspoken truths of a man who had given his mind, soul, and decades of effort to a world that couldn't always handle him. Tucked behind a rusted sliding wall panel in the far end of the garage, they found what felt like a shrine. The room was dim, lit only by a single hanging bulb, and filled wall to wall with trophies, framed black and white photographs, driver suits, helmets, and original rule books. Some items were neatly displayed. Others were stacked in no particular order, as if even Smokey didn't know where to begin cataloging the life he had lived. One shelf held a row of trophies from Daytona, Sebring, and Indianapolis, all bearing the names of drivers who had raced under Smokey's wrench. Another corner displayed faded jackets with patches from teams he'd out-engineered. And in the center of the room was a workbench covered with tools, each labeled and preserved like a mechanic's altar. But what drew the most attention was a stack of old rule books heavily marked up in pencil and even red marker. Smokey had annotated them with corrections, sarcasm, and notes like, "Nice try, but I'm still smarter." Pinned to the wall was a photo of Smokey beside his famous 7/8, Shell smiling that crooked grin, with a cigar clamped in his teeth. Next to it, in his own writing, this one made them rewrite the rules.